Okay. Hello, everyone. We're about to start in a few minutes after doing an access housekeeping and then acknowledgement. Um, First of all, we will do the access housekeeping. So I will ask all the panel participants to introduce themselves with their name, pronoun, brief info, and visual description of themselves. For example, this is Yuri Kim. I use they them pronoun. The visual description for myself is an East Asian non-binary queer femme with the short black hair. I'm wearing a hoodie in a navy color. And also for the like a panelist and a moderator, please like speak slowly for the captioner. I know it's when you get excited, you may want to like speak really fast, but remind yourself to slow down from time to time so that the captioners can type in what you said correctly. And before speaking, always please share your name first. For example, like this is Yuri speaking, or this is Yuri. Regarding terms and names, if you're sharing someone's name, please spell it out. For example, if I'm like citing Xu Bing's work in a talk, I will say his name um, and spell it out as Xubing. If you're citing any acronym, please explain what it refers to. For example, like PIC refers to Prison Industrial Complex. And then lastly, for the self-care, if you need a break during the workshop, please take your time. Do stretching, walking, drinking water, going to bathroom, whatever you need to do, take care of yourself. And then feel free to join the remaining session whenever you need to. And I will share the land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that I'm calling in from the traditional territory of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux peoples. And I will mm, name the names as well. Kickapoo refers to Kickapoo. Peoria refers to as Peoria. Potawatomi as Potawatomi. Miami as Miami, and the last Sioux Sioux. This acknowledgement is only one part of the larger collective responsibility towards the indigenous rights and justice. And now I will hand this over to Terry. Yay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your moderator. My name is Terry, Terri Hudson, Hudson. I am a queer Black disabled actor, performance artist, and disability access advocate. I am a brown skinned Black woman. I have my hair pulled back from my face, and I am wearing a pinkish purple shirt. Michelle?
Hi, my name is Michelle Zacharias. My first name is spelled Michelle. My last name is spelled Z as in zebra, Acarias. I use she, her pronouns. I am a writer, a journalist, a community organizer. I have been specifically organizing around defunding the police movement and abolitionist spaces for several years. I specifically also organize around queer communities, and I focus on centering the voices of Black and Indigenous trans queer members of our community. So my visual description is that I am wearing a bright yellow-ish shirt that says not gay as in happy, but queer as in fuck the police. I have a short, messy bisexual bob that's pinned to the side right now. And I am, I would say, like a lighter skin Latinx person who is wearing a little bit of like eyeliner and like just like a slight hint of like beige lipstick. And oh, my nails right now are like sharp and they're like pink with one black nail in the ring finger. So yeah.
Thank you. Vida?
Hello, everybody. My name is Vida Cleveland. That is Vita. My last name is Cleveland. I use they and she pronouns. I would say that a lot of my activism and organizing is rooted in the art perspective. I am a believer in the mantra of Nina Simone, that is NinaSimone, pretty sure. But Nina Simone's mantra is, how can you be an artist and not reflect the times? That to me is the definition of an artist. And a lot of my work comes from that perspective because I am a trained performer, and it just feels like where I belong in a lot of this fight these days. I have shown up in other ways in organizing roles before, specifically around disability advocacy, because it's something that's very important to me as somebody who identifies as mentally and physically disabled. I am wearing, I'm wearing a fluorescent pink, orange, black neon shirt. I have short locked brown hair. I am a brown skinned Black woman, and I am currently wearing a necklace containing stones, charms, and tools.
Thank you. Noah?
Hi everyone, I'm Noah Ohashi, Noahshi. My last name is Ohashi. I'm from Japan, and I work for both Japan and US. I identify as a trans, queer, disabled person, and my work in Japan is mostly journalist on TV show that focus on mental health, institutionalization, and I also are disability activists in Japan. And in the US, I am community organizer using civil disobedience direct action. One is Chicago Adapt. I'm co-coordinator, which is social justice organization. And also currently I'm putting efforts on international student with disabilities, immigrants with disabilities, and first generation with disabilities to have equal rights as no matter what their citizen status. With my visual description is I have brown short hair, wearing green glasses, and wearing, I don't know whether you can see or not, but polka dots-ish, dark blue color shirt, and my skin color is whitish color. I don't know how to describe whitish color, but the light is getting not so much, so it looks more darker. Thank you.
And Bria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bria Royal. That's BRIAROYAL. And my pronouns that you can use to refer to me are they, them, or she, her. Yeah, I'm an artist. I like to engage in a variety of types of art making, but mainly I'm an animator and VFX artist. Right now, I'm working in Los Angeles, and I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I'm also really big on other forms of more traditional art making, such as zine making, painting, pretty much anything I can use to express myself creatively. I also do a lot of tattooing on myself, for example. But the kind of common thread of my art is me using it as a tool for creating new mythologies for ourselves, for our future liberated descendants, and trying to imagine the world, what a transformed world could look like, and using art making as a way to share that vision with other people. I'm also a healing justice advocate, and I am, I use art making also as a form of kind of doing that healing work with myself. I choose to heal in a way that transforms harm and that prevents harm from reoccurring. And I'm someone of bipolar experience. I'm also a part of the autism spectrum of disorders. Originally was diagnosed as having Asperger's, so I do identify with the ASPE community as well, though ASD, or autism spectrum of disorders, is kind of the current terminology. I am a Black femme wearing a black shirt that says defend communities, defund police, with some white line work done by Monica Trinidad. That's Monica, Monica Trinidad, Trinidad. I have a gold chain, and I have also a bisexual bob going on, a little more foofy, and I have a little long braided tail as well. Around me, there is a yellow painting behind me depicting myself. And I'm sitting just on a couch in a pretty well-lit room.
Okay, we have everyone introduced. So let's go ahead and get started on our questions. I'm going to call on people in the order that you're appearing on the screen. And let's be aware of our time constraint, and everyone is going to have 2 to 3 minutes to answer each question roughly. The first question is, can you give an example of inclusion support or accommodations that you have received from an organization or collective while participating in an action? And we'll start with Michelle.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing that I asked for when I'm speaking about building like an infrastructure of accessibility into collective movement work is transparency, right? Because I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that like accessibility isn't a one fits all sort of like blanket. And what is accessible for one person may not necessarily be accessible for somebody else. So the primary ask that most disabled community members have is just transparency around what is and isn't possible, right? And this is also functioning from the assumption that the collective has done the necessary work to make as many accommodations and to put in that effort. So one of the things I always do when I talk to, like, say, like a collective or an org about steps they should take around accessibility, it's just constantly post accessibility notes in the event page, right? That means that a person should not have to seek you out to learn what accommodations are available, because they should be pinned at the top of the page. And your efforts should also be transparent. So for example, if I am seeing this event and it's on the 30th floor of a skyrise and there's no elevator, I would like to know that you made a genuine effort to try and find a space that had, a lift or a ramp or something else in place. Because I think that a lot of what I'm seeing is just the lack of that effort, or there's no effort to do that in the first place. But if I am working with a collective or an organization to saying like, hey, like we, tried to hit a couple of different spots and there was nothing, I think the big thing that comes out of transparency is that suddenly there are spaces and there are resources, because people are saying, hey, actually, like, I do know a spot, instead of kind of keeping it a like shameful closed door process that makes it difficult for not only us to figure out, what's happening, but for other people too, who are interested in partaking in your events. So I would say that would be like my number one thing, my ask. And that's been the most helpful thing that I've seen done by collectives and organizations in this kind of movement work.
Thank you, Michelle. Vida.
Hello, this is Vida, and the example that comes to mind deals with a type of accessibility issue that I didn't realize that I was dealing with until I was confronted with it. The presence of like sober spaces is incredibly rare. I am not somebody who identifies as sober for quite a few reasons. One, because I consider my cannabis consumption a part of my mental and physical health regimen. But it has been a thing I've noticed where the leaning on the consumption of substances, either be it cannabis or be it alcohol or quite a few other things that I've seen in organizing spaces. So when I do when I do find myself in organizing spaces that are creating sober environments, or at least the option, there's like a time slot where there's just like, we're not going to be consuming anything between here and here, or we're just not going to do that, period. And if you feel the need to do that, then you'll have to, figure out a way to do that elsewhere. Or, sometimes it's all right to do that before you arrive. I speak to that one because it is nice to, it felt nice to have that option. To feel that if I wanted to be in a space where I didn't want to feel the pressure to drink, which is something I personally deal with, then I could choose that. So while rare, that's one moment that I really think digs into some of the deeper, I would say more societally obscure types of accessibility.
Thanks, Vida. Noah?
Yes, this is Noah, and I'm not on the wheelchair right now, so I forgot to say I have a physical disability. But when I think about accessibility, it's not like simple one thing. It's more broad, and it might conflict each other types of disability. But every time I think about accessibility, I think who is not in this space? And that's a big question we always ask as a disability rights organization. And for example, when we do direct action, for me, I have epilepsy too. So the police car flash will cause me seizure. So what we can do is to have a sunglasses human shield, like those kind of like accommodation, like at least save me and explain to the police that this light will cause seizure. And that's one thing of accommodation. And another accommodation slash as a needed is I have also chemical sensitivity. So I cannot be in the space that people have fragrance or too much makeup that cause too much chemical reaction. And that is also the space that a lot of people, when the disability rights organization or social justice organization think about a space that it's accessible, nobody think about those spaces, whether the people can go into it. And I think that's another accessibility that I are getting from and asking for. And in the last, actually not last, but I have two more. One is personal care attendant. Always when we do the meeting in person, we always ensure to have at least 2 or 3 personal assistant in order to have people who want to drink, but they cannot drink by themselves, or eat, but they cannot eat by themselves, or go bathroom. We don't want to have a financial burden for them to bring their own personal assistants, because as we know, the disabled people are living majority are in poverty. And in the last is we ask for the Spanish translator, because not everyone use English. That's a lot of big American way to think. Hey, you're in US, you need to learn, like you need to speak English, but not everyone is fluent in English, and we need to acknowledge and we need to accommodate people so that we can be more broad in one space that many people can be in. And that's we try to be more accommodated. And ensuring accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. And Bria.
Yeah, this is Bria speaking. I relate a lot to what Noah communicated just now as well. One of my most salient kind of memories of thinking about accessibility in a protest space happened, I want to say 2015, 2016, at the Shut It Down, the hashtag Shut It Down action that took place downtown to fire Dante Servin, who was Dante Servin spelled DanteServin, who was an off-duty cop who shot Rekia Boyd fatally. Rekia Boyd's name spelled Rekia Boyd, in 2012. And not getting too much into that case because I get very weird around martyrdom and these kinds of platforms, to be honest. But I remember in participating in that action, there were like Care Bears. There were people specifically in this Care Bear role, which was basically a person who is at the action and their responsibility, their duty is to kind of just be going around and checking in on people, making sure, everyone has what they need. And I really liked that because we often think about accessibility as something that we set up and then it's there. But accessibility is actually something that is constantly evolving moment to moment based on the changing environment, based on new people coming into the environment and leaving, the environment just shifting. So it's a condition that we seek to maintain, but it's something that we do have to actively maintain because conditions and situations are always changing. But another thing that comes to mind as well is in a couple of years ago, while I was still really involved with For the People's Artists Collective, who I love so much, which is also abbreviated as FTP. And I was starting to experience hearing loss in a very, very rapid way. And similar to what Vita was communicating earlier, I have also physical disabilities. It's really difficult for me to manage my blood circulation. And it's always, up to that point, I had always thought of disability as a very private thing or something that I could keep private if I wanted to, right? Which there's a lot of privilege associated with that, by the way. And in experiencing a rapid decline in my hearing over the course of about 2 years, I'd always had tinnitus lifelong, but didn't start experiencing the hearing loss until a couple of years ago. And I remember just that embarrassment and just that kind of burden of having to constantly remind people that, hey, that whole hearing loss thing, still a thing, like, or whatever disability you're carrying with you, like, doesn't just kind of stop being a thing after I tell you about it, and having to constantly kind of remind people. I remember like having such a conflict with that, but I remember letting For the People Artist Collective, FTP, know, like, hey, I'm going through this thing. We just need to be mindful of that. And I think, so we were starting to meet in places that were quieter, so that I could actually hear what, because I could still hear a little bit, but still hear people to some capacity, as well as just sitting in a circle so that I could read people's lips as they were talking, like just little conditional changes like that become habit. And now that's just a thing that people just try to do at FTP meetings and things like that. Like sitting in a circle just became something we just always did. So having the invitation to like kind of raise those concerns is always like the best option, because you have people who there's a perception that disability is something that's supposed to be experienced in private. And so the more that we can invite people to make that just a regular topic of conversation and a part of regular practice, I think is the best.
Thank you so much, Bria. Our next question is, how do we reconcile the limited resource DIY nature of protest actions with access needs? And we'll start again with Michelle.
I mean, I also want to invite any of my fellow panelists to jump in. If anything throughout, my talking session resonates, feel free to jump in. But I first of all, I want to say I strongly resonate with, this like idea that like, I don't know, there's just like, what Bria was saying about how so often like a collective or an org or like a space is like, here's what I did, and this is my checklist, and these are the accessibility things that we've done, and that's that, right? Like it's over. And I think there just needs to be more of a discussion around what it means to constantly and actively prioritize accessibility, because I think a lot of people are under the misconception that accessibility is just for people with disabilities, and it absolutely isn't, right? And when you think about, like, for example, queer events, right? I think we talked a little bit, Noah talked a little bit about the like perfumes, and then like, and especially in the queer like club scene, right? Like we see a lot of that. We see a lot of flashing lights, fog machines, things that are kind of like a staple in like queer culture party scene, but are like really bad, like not great things to have in these spaces. And like, even like, and I say this all the time, so much of like, for example, celebratory pride events take place in like Boys Town, which is filled with like cops, right, all the time. And you think about how inaccessible that is for Black and Indigenous people and community members who want to be a part of those celebrations. And like that transcends just, the disabled community. That makes it inaccessible for a whole different community. So really trying to like reframe and understand the way that we talk about accessibility as being like so much larger, right? And to answer your question, to tie this back into the question that was asked, I think we have to just make more of an effort. Like, I don't believe that there are not enough resources out in the world for collective and organizers and things like that to not have a genuine like structure in place to prioritize accessibility, right? I think that a lot of it is just kind of coming from a place of like ignorance or not really knowing what to do. But this is the same community that managed to raise like hundreds of thousands of dollars for a Black trans-led org in Chicago. And it's not because we're all wealthy, it's because we're collectively resourceful people, right? And so we have to keep that in mind and understand that like, all right, like the burden doesn't always have to fall on us individually. Like we need to destigmatize the conversation around disability, as Bria was saying, and like just keep like making it a practice, right? Like accessibility is not a checklist, it's a practice.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Vida.
This is Vida. All of that. I am of the belief that things don't always have to be the same each time it's tried. And they also don't have to happen as frequently or recurringly. And I guess what I mean to say by all of that is sometimes it's a matter of evaluating capacity. For example, if a march didn't work out the way we thought it would, taking those moments in a march or saying, do we need to have a march this time? Do we need to think about other ways to get the point across, or
Let's say, and does this march have to be like 10 miles? Is that necessary?
no. And there are also, I will say that there are merits to the use of distance. The biggest one that comes to mind is the March on Washington, right? It's one of the biggest examples of, we're going to go from here to here to prove this point, and that's how much it matters to us. That was also in the 60s. And now we have a different understanding of physical and mental capacities around direct actions. I think a lot about how the Panthers kind of went about recruiting their members. So for the Black Panthers, that is BLACK, Panthers, PANTHERS. They are a historically radical group of organizers that moved within a more community-based way of radicalizing their community. They went into places where folks were underfed and offered to feed them. You know, it wasn't just expecting people to not have what they need and to also be radical and to also be woke. It was like, if you're going to work with us and we're trying to help you, then we need to feed you. They didn't stay in condos, but they had roofs over their heads. The basic needs were met. The capacities were adjusted. And that made things more successful. Things were able to grow faster because they took their time. And I think of those moments like it's okay to do it differently whenever the opportunity arises.
Thank you, Vida. Noah?
Yes, this is Noah, and I strongly resonate with both Michelle and Vida mentioned. I think biggest question we need to ask is, are we thinking accessibility as first priority, or are we thinking about how events gonna success as a first priority? And because I believe that accommodation or accessibility is not given by charity or like, oh, it's extra something for extra people. it's not like that. Because when we think about accessibility, as I mentioned in the first, it's really broad. And when we think and consistently learning and evolve, we can be more collective. And when we can come as a collective, in the end, the event will be successful. So, or anything. But when we do direct action, we need a lot of people. But if that is not accessible, the people are not going to show up, or only same people are going to show up. And I think that's the criticism of 60s and 70s and 80s disability rights organization that is hashtag too white, that many people who only have money could do a lot of stuff. And I think what I'm trying to say is DIY nature is basically lack of resources of people who are forgetting, who could be in the same space. And by coming together, we can have more resources and accessibilities that we can evolve and have as a collective and stronger activism. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. And Bria?
Yeah, I want to pull back a little bit to what Vita was communicating earlier. I think there's, this there's this pressure for activism to be sexy, and the lack of disabled representation in activism comes down to disability not and disabled people being seen as something outside of the realm of sex appeal, outside of like this very kind of like fetishized appeal, and the only way we can enter those spaces is through very fetishized representations, becoming like just something to drop in like into messaging and things like that. And that one points to just a larger need for us to be engaging in more anti-capitalist forms of movement awareness raising, rather than just using traditional marketing modes to forward movement work. I understand why we do it, but we do need to think outside of that. And it's also why I'm a huge advocate for block organizing, where you literally just start with the people who live on your block and you develop a practice in a community with those people. And because those are the people who are going to be most capable of intervening and supporting you in an emergency, or you're most likely to just encounter any kind of situation that would require emergency attention around those people. And there's just so much possibility you can get done, because, oh, wonder how this initiative we've planned is going. I can walk down the street and just see that person maybe. Or if I'm having an issue inside of my home, maybe someone can hear it and knock on my door and come to me in a way that's just much more fluid than some of the hoops we have to like jump through with mass organizing. So I wish more people were just saw the appeal of that. And also, I just think that, and is actually something that I've been wanting to kind of formalize more, kind of praxis around, maybe start a training around if any of y'all are interested in collaborating on it, but just increasing spatial awareness and having literal spatial awareness training, because I do believe accessibility is something that can just naturally arise with the proper spatial planning. And which is one reason why city planners and things like, and people like that, people at that level really need to be in these conversations around accessibility, because we can create like architecture that just promotes accessibility naturally. I play a video game called City Skylines all the time by Paradox Interactive, spelled Paradox Interactive. And it's one of those simulation games like SimCity and things like that. But I play that game because there's situations where it's like, okay, how many city blocks do my simulated people have to cross to get to this tourist attraction? And how does that increase overall danger and traffic in terms of the game's like point system or whatever? But it's like things like that I should also be thinking about when I'm choosing a location to have an event. And so I think as much as we can get people in the mindset of thinking through the processes that the environment that you're curating affords, as much as we can do that, we can kind of get ahead of some of these accessibility issues. It's like almost a preventative, preemptive type of care for each other.
Thank you, Bria. We do have 2 more questions, so I want to remind people that we are on a schedule, so let's try to stay concise, although I know everyone has a lot of important things to say. The next question is, what are some ways that we can use technology to expand access? Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it seems like such a vague like question when we already have so many like ways to expand accessibility that aren't rooted directly in technology. And like I think especially now with, you know, the pandemic and the fact that like so many of us are so I guess we're over consuming digital forms of media right now, right? Like we're always on Zoom, we're always in meetings, we're just back to back virtual spaces can be really inaccessible to a lot of folks. So the idea that we have to expand accessibility and somehow it's rooted in technology is kind of like, it just doesn't like sit right with me necessarily. I think the idea that like it should also like fall on us to like expand accessibility. Like a lot of these things, like Brio was saying, like are built directly into like capitalist systems, right? So like even if you think about the CTA in Chicago, right? It's our train system. The closer the CTA gets to Black and brown neighborhoods, the less accessible those like train stations become. Their elevators no longer work, or you know, there's no escalators, things like that. And like the closer you get to the north side. So the idea that it's somehow just like we're gonna have better technology that makes, our spaces more accessible for everyone, I think is an inaccuracy. I think we need to like challenge the systems in place that are making certain limitations around specific communities, right? So like, how do we get Black and Indigenous disabled communities access to the technology that already exists, right? Or access to accessibility. So I'm going to keep this short, but that's kind of my understanding and framing around that.
Thank you. Vida?
I want to just like lift up the idea that accessibility through technology isn't inherently a fix-all situation. I just want to thank Michelle for bringing that up, because I personally don't think about that as much as I probably could. One of the things that comes to mind is honesty about like what resources we actually have, and I think often we are led to believe that the technology we have access to is the maximum of it. And what I mean by that is we have figured out a way to complete the NBA season before we established a national lockdown in this nation. We figured out a way to continue. Actually, most competitive sports are still happening right now. I think the hockey season is due to return soon. And so the things I'm thinking of are related to the fact that we actually do have more access to some things that we give ourselves credit for as a society, because so many of those things are rooted in controlling other people or limiting other people. Like I always tell people that a cell phone is a computer that just so happens to make calls and send text messages. We've also seen teletherapy and all these accessibility things come up for able-bodied people and neurotypical people. So they do exist, but we aren't using them, I don't think, in the ways that include all people. So it doesn't create the access that we need inherently.
Thanks, Vida. Noah?
Yes, this is Noah, and I totally shout out. My English is weird. Say agree with Michelle and Rita, but at the same time, I know technology can change certain way for the beneficial for people with disabilities. For example, currently I'm working by myself, but because it's COVID, I cannot see each other. I am pissed off with the Taylor Street because it's on the UIC property, but most of the store or street are inaccessible. And so what I'm doing right now is accessible mapping, basically taking all the picture of inaccessible spaces and creating maps, and not only physical disability, disabled people saying, oh, I cannot get into it. Every types of different type of disabled folks could put the comment in how this is inaccessible for them and how they want to be changed. And I want to have those kind of concrete evidence to advocate or use as an activism, so that even though everyone don't need to go as a whole to march into the each store, that we can be collective as using an online platform. But at the same time, I think we can use the technology of this advantage part. For example, Uber. We have Uber, but and in Chicago we have accessible Uber too, but the time is totally different than Uber X, and price is different than Uber X. So what I do is I order Uber at the exact same time as my friend and report back to Uber. This is unfair. This is not right. So like using technology as disadvantage as for disabled folks for the activism. I think I use that for as not expanding accessibility, but in the future it may likely to be accessible. That's my thought about the technology.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Noah. And Bria.
Thanks, Bria speaking. I totter between being a techno optimist and techno pessimist. So the techno pessimist in me wants to say that technology, as Michelle and Vita have outlined, definitely is informed by white supremacy and particularly white men's burden. Kind of this techno utopia, that message that is often used by big tech companies often has a heavy hand of kind of imperialization tones and things like that. We have the answer to make the world a better place, and it's in this view can be super narrow and limiting. So as much as we can divest technology from being something that only exists within capitalism, of course, would be great. But the techno optimist in me, I think the immediacy of services that Noah is referencing is something I would love to see developed more over time. The fact that we are all communicating via a variety of modes just right now with our ASL interpretation and the live captioning, the CART services. Sorry, I don't know the full abbreviation for CART. If anyone can input that later. But yeah, I think increasing that immediacy has lots of potential. I think redistribution in terms of equitable redistribution, such as what we're seeing right now with mutual aid funds, is another huge possibility of technology, not only using it as a medium to advocate for transactions of those services, but to do so in a logical way, in the same way that Google Maps will reroute people to lesser trafficked streets to promote overall traffic flow. I think we can use technology and algorithms to do the same way with some of our mutual aid programs to fix some of these issues where certain people are at the bottom of the list, so they never get this or whatever. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that for now, since I know we're short on time.
Thank you, Bria. We have one last question, and some of this has already been touched on. So if we can keep really short answers, because we're just about at time. What item or items would you add to an accessibility checklist for organizers? Michelle.
All right, this is Michelle. I am, again, I hate checklists. I hate this idea of this being like, I hate to be like the negative like person on the panel, but I just hate this idea that you have to have this like set checklist. I think part of it, I think we should think about this more as like a process, right? A process and a practice. So making sure that every time you have an event or you have an action, you're posting accessibility information, right? People shouldn't be seeking you out. It should be pinned to the top of your page. And then you should be available. Like you should have a point person for accessibility that people can quickly find and quickly ask questions to. So I would say prioritizing accessibility means having a point person. And then even taking it a step further, I would say being transparent and like open about the fact that you're not going to have all of the resources you need to make everything as accessible as you possibly can, right? So asking for help. So if there is something that you feel like you are not able to do, there is no shame in reaching out to folks and saying like, hey, can we find a way to make this, can we have a conversation about what would make this space better for you? And you'll find that most people are pretty receptive as long as you're not weirdly tokenizing us or making us feel like we're just like your go-to disability person, like, so just being able to have that conversation, being transparent, and then making a genuine effort for me are kind of like on my list.
Thank you. Vida?
Hi, this is Vida. The biggest thing that comes to mind is if you're is analyzing if your accessibility is including the more marginalized people in regards to disability. Like we know that Indigenous people and Black people are dealing with it at higher levels. So when we think about organizing, especially around especially around liberation, I think it's important to consider the most marginalized person in the room always, and ask ourselves if that person is included in our work. And I think there's so many different ways to go about that, and it's a very general term, and I think I leave it open because it doesn't narrow it down. There's so many different ways to spin that strategy to include as many people as possible.
Thank you, Vida. Noah?
Hi, this is Noah. I try to be short, but sorry if it's long. So I have two. One is to check who is the organizer and who is the officers or who's like the team of the organization, to see the different race, ethnicity, sexual identity, different identity. If the people who are different people coming together as an organizer, then we can have a lot of perspective of accessibilities. But if it's like cis white people only doing organizing, even though they're good at organization, they don't see so much accessibility needs that it may need it. So I think as a checklist is check ourselves and check others whether we're having all the representation in the room or not as an organizing team. And second thing is the checklist, as I said in the first, that check whether what kind of things that we don't have now on the list. I think that's the biggest question we need to keep asking ourselves, because we don't have all answers right now too. And we are learning and figuring it out by doing multiple times. Sometimes we fail, but we need to learn and putting efforts on the work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. And Bria.
Bria, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Bria speaking. I do have an accessible protest pack checklist that I actually developed. I was commissioned by March for Our Lives a couple of years ago, and I developed a checklist flyer and digital asset for them to hand out to the younger participants, introducing some concepts of accessibility. That's available on my website. But the more important part of that sheet isn't actually the checklist items, it's the open-ended questions that precedes each checklist items, which is things like, can everyone get here? Can everyone feel safe here? Can people take a break? Things like that are just questions we can constantly ask ourselves, not only for a specific moment or event, but for our daily practice, for our daily lives and connection. So, and acknowledging that our answer to those questions will often be no, and being honest about that and keep continuing to acknowledge it, rather than being something that we sweep under the rug, to continuously acknowledge every time we do fail, to provide a space that is accessible to everyone who wanted to be in that space. I think is important because it's so easy for us to just be like, oh, well, next event, you know, but actually to say, yeah, we weren't able to provide that. We weren't able to guarantee that. Let's keep that in mind for next time.
Okay, well, that is unfortunately the amount of time that we have for this discussion today. I'd like to thank everyone for coming and participating and sharing your wisdom and your experience. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much. This was so dope.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing space and for all this beautiful insight.
Yes. Also, shout out to Terry for being a dope moderator and keeping us somewhat on task and on pace. So thank you for that and that energy. Also, I want to say thank you to the ASL interpreters and the folks who were captioning all of this stuff.